There's something that you can't really improvise, and that is flavor. As engineers, especially when you're dealing with tropical rhythms or with instruments that are correlated with tropical music, let's say, for example, a conga, a bongo, you really need to record them with flavor. Not being technically correct, it's more about how does it make you feel as opposed to how technically accurate does it sound. And those are two different concepts because you use technology to get something that sounds right in order for people to feel something.
Welcome back to Vanguard Conversations episode ? I don't keep track of them at all. I should be more organized about this, but if you see my office behind me right now, I don't know how well you can see my repair desk, but organization is definitely not in my wheelhouse. This is Maria Elisa Ayerbe, and I am saying it as white as possible because, I mean, look at me. I don't roll R's. I took 4 years of French like a dummy, and I lived in Southern California, so I
But
make
those are ours are
yeah. So Maria Lisa, I kind of accidentally, we sort of accidentally bumped into each other, like music industry wise, sort of the way that most of the relationships in the music industry happen. I think through Boris Milan, if I'm not mistaken.
Get it. I thought we huh. I think I followed you and then we met because I was working with Leapwing Audio on the NAM booth and you
That's
guys were
right.
right there. And then we started talking because we spent too many hours on that over there. And
Yeah.
then eventually we all that's the power of NAM. Everybody becomes friends with everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe we met Boris, like it was a common friend and we spent some time with him, but I think it was just because we were just
You
hanging
were
out
doing the
there.
stuff with Leapwing. That's right. Yeah. I mean, like, you're right. NAM is this great big, and also, not only is it great big friend fest, but it's also this place where you barely remember anything at the end of the show because it's such a
Yes.
loud blur.
And also this I remember pretty accurately. It was the NAM where, correct me if I'm wrong, COVID was born in
Yeah, it was
2020.
2020. It was the last one before the defecation hit the oscillation,
Yeah,
so to
and
speak.
we
Yeah.
and there was a lot of people sick. I think you were sick, I was sick, and probably we invented COVID or the strain got even worse thanks to
Yeah.
the thousands of people that were sick on that love fest of
I will
audio.
say that was the worst Namthrax I've ever seen at Nam. Like, one of my buddies who's my age, Darren, who runs Flock Audio, he didn't even make it to the booth for 2 of the show days. He was so sick.
Oh, damn.
My partner Ken went to the hospital after the first day, and he was in the
Wow. No,
hospital.
yeah,
He was in the hospital for like 3 days because he was an older
yeah.
guy and just like, you know, super dehydrated and,
It was
running an
bad.
insane fever. It was so bad that year. And you might be right. It might have been COVID, but it was the worst
They
Namthrax.
didn't know there were no tests. And I
Yeah.
remember everybody laughing, saying, "Oh, what if we got that Chinese thing that is going on?" And it's like, I
Two
don't
months
know.
later.
Yeah, and 2 months later, and it's like, oh, damn, maybe it was us. We'll never know. Yeah.
So Maria Lisa, you've worked with, I mean, Paula Arena, or I'm once again, I'm just gonna say it as white as possible. I'm gonna be like Paula Arena,
Arenas.
yeah, Arenas, yes, and you've worked with Patrona Martinez, Laura Parsini. And once again, this is me mispronouncing all of these because I took 4 years of French. I'm not even that good at English, so you'll have to cut me some
There you go.
slack here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So you have done a ton of work, not just in the Latin music, but in sort of mainstream indie music as well. And I was curious just thinking about engineering, because I think about engineering like the first time I did like a heavier record that was like metal adjacent and going, oh, I am ill prepared for this with everything else I've done. What's something in the Latin world of engineering and production that people who might not have done it don't like appreciate, like something that kind of is
Oh,
like an eye opener?
that is a great question, and that's actually something that happened to me while I was living in Nashville. And I mean, when I lived in Nashville, people immediately assume that they are recording engineers specifically. Like it stops with them, right?
Mhm.
Because of the volume of work that they get, because of the obvious recording tradition that's been going on in Nashville, and there's a standard of quality. I mean, all those are true facts. However, there's something that people, as you've pointed before in this conversation like 3 times, there's something that you can't really improvise, and that is flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes with being Latin American, especially being from the Caribbean. And the thing that people miss out is that as engineers, especially when you're dealing with tropical rhythms or with instruments that
Mm-hmm.
are correlated with tropical music, let's say, for example, a conga, a bongo, um, you really need to record them with flavor, with it's a not being technically correct. It's more about how does it make you feel as opposed to how technically accurate does it sound.
Mm-hmm.
And those are two different concepts because you use technology to get something that sounds right in order for people to feel something,
Yeah.
as opposed to you just record it to get it onto the record because it's got to be there and it's got to sound nice,
Yeah.
which is kind of like what we do in relation to its entire context. But in here, it's not, it's about the context, but it's also about how does it make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened to me was that when I was living in Nashville, I ended up getting recommended to this producer who's an Italian guy who'd been playing congas since forever. Well, he's an incredible, amazing drummer and percussionist. And he used to be back in the 90s, although he's Italian, he started touring with Tito Puente, the famous timbale player.
Okay.
And like he was the conga guy for Tito Puente. This is like being second guitar for Eric Clapton. You know what I mean? It's like huge responsibility. And this was an Italian guy who basically learned the ways of being an amazing percussionist, Latin percussionist. So Pino, who's the percussionist, and if he ever sees that, I love you, dude. And I remember him telling me, like, when I got there, he's like, "You've come to save my life because nobody in Nashville knows how to record congas or Latin percussion the way it has to be with soul." And it's a totally different sense of feeling. And it's like you have to be born with it or being born into it in order to understand it. And that's a totally different concept from just being a great recording engineer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you say with flavor, can you give us like a kind of a concrete example of what
Right.
how the signal chain might differ, or how you might EQ it differently or whatever than if it was going in something that was more mainstream, traditional American mainstream or pop?
Right. So for example, like let's say congas. So for the longest time, the engineers that Pino had been hiring, they would just go ahead and it's like, oh, you have congas. So you either have 2 or you have 3, or sometimes you have 4 or 5. And a lot of people don't know that each conga has a different function.
Okay.
Like you just not randomly bang on different congas just because. There are ones that are congas, but there are one other ones that are called the tumba, and they have different tunings and they serve different purposes. Because also you got to know that, especially for salsa, there's the concept called the clave, which is the rhythmic subdivision for salsa, and it changes a lot. So depending on how it changes, the different congas will have different functions. So a regular recording engineer that doesn't know this, first knowing about it, which is, I mean, it's obviously a thing that you can learn. If you know music enough, you'll learn it. But a regular audio engineer can just go and do an A/B, like an overhead pair, and be like, I'm just going to capture like eagle's eye of what's happening with this like drum disposition. However, when you're born into it, you know that the conga is the one element that keeps the glue together for salsa music. It's the one that brings the pa, 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 pa. And in between, that's where the conga happens. And that's how people dance. So it has to be extremely present. So how do you mic this thing? You drop an R20 or SM57 or a 421 exchangeable microphones, or even an Audix A4, whatever. You drop one on each conga, and you may or may not use an overhead. It doesn't matter,
So it's
because you
almost
want
like close miking toms.
it's exactly like close miking toms.
Okay.
But the other thing that you do, and that is something that, again, it takes a little bit more to understand, because you're feeling the instrument as opposed to just hearing the instrument, is that congas and most wooden instrument, and this shouldn't be a surprise to basically anyone, wood resonates with wood. And a lot of these engineers never actually consider what type of floor do you have, or if you have carpet and whatnot. So most of us traditional Latin recording engineers, if you're going to record any percussion where somebody is like from African descent, where somebody's touching it with the hands and it's wood and everything else, you're gonna, if your floor is not wood, you're gonna add extra wood to the room, because it creates a specific resonance to the drums that is like symbiotic
Interesting.
to the tone of the instruments. And it also, even if you're closed miking, it's going to definitely change the harmonics that are being accentuated in your conga or any other percussive instrument, being a djembe or any other of those.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that about the wooden percussion instruments. That does make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, there's a lot of old studios with hardwood floors, and that doesn't work.
It turned out that the studio where my former boss was recording, it was a wood cabin, so it made total sense.
Okay.
So we didn't have to make those adjustments. But I've been in places where like it's a carpeted recording studio, like live room, or there's concrete or tile floors or whatever. No, you actually need to bring like a big piece of wood or some sort of stage that actually is made of wood, so that you add those additional harmonics that resonate in sympathy with the wood from the instrument.
That makes a lot of sense. And with Latin music, which, like you said, has a lot of influences from African music because of unfortunately, because of the slave trade, and the Caribbean being an early part of that, Haitian Revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But I find that music from the Caribbean, from Africa, and from like Indo-European areas just is so much more rhythmically rich than, there's so much more, like you said, subdivision. There's much more interest in rhythm. And we were just talking about this before we started. I find that when you hear Latin music enter like the mainstream, they tend to water that down.
Of course.
Because they make it palatable for people who look like me. Let's be real.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of it's a cultural thing where like you guys have not been born or raised into dancing.
Yeah, we clap on the 1 and the 3. We know.
Yeah, ish.
Yeah.
So it's a very different cultural approach, and in the end, I've always said engineer has one approach, which is the traditional one, but there's also has to be the approach, which is, I mean, and by the tradition, I mean the technical one, looking for that technical excellence, which is what unfortunately all of us do all the time, and is extremely exhausting. But there has to be another lane in for engineering, which has to be function, which is like, what is this instrument doing and why is it doing it? Like, I try to teach my students how to mix music in terms of function, as opposed to this is the instrument and this is the spot that it should occupy, and I should just be making this instrument as best as possible. Like if this is a sad trumpet on this jazz tune and its purpose is like making me cry, because that's why it was written for, then I should find ways in my recording to make it cry the best way possible,
Hmm.
in its performance, and I should find a way to mix it so that I am enhancing that function.
The emotive function, because I think we sometimes as engineers we get so technical and we're thinking about frequency domains and all that stuff that we forget that like the ultimate goal of music is to make you feel things a lot of the time.
Correct.
So as an engineer, in order to, you're saying as an engineer, in order to, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I'm trying to make sure I understand, in order to
Yeah.
better serve the music, you have to be thinking about those feelings that the artist and the musician.
Wants to convey, or maybe even find new feelings.
Hmm.
Find new feelings, which is carving into the arrangement and maybe being like, yeah, like, you know how you added that extra synth line that supports that higher octave on that solo? That is going to make that solo shine a lot more towards the end than just keeping that synth down.
Mm.
That's what it was written for. And there's always usually a disconnection between a lot of engineers who again are focused more on like finding the technical excellence in whatever it is that you're focusing, because it could be
Hmm.
many aspects, but forgetting that the arrangement is placed in there for a purpose by the artist or producers or whoever, and then that's exactly what we should be conveying to the listener
Yeah.
as engineers.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think engineers are a lot less of just the, quote unquote button pushers. And there's much more, I mean, especially as like we talked about, there's less money in the music industry to support multiple roles. Engineers are usually producers too, it feels like, especially in the area where you work, which is more of the independent artist rather than
Yep.
like the main labels.
Yep. And something that producers slash engineers do have pretty accurately or have nailed pretty accurately is that relationship between like emotional function and technicality,
Hmm.
to the point where like we know that sometimes they'll even prioritize function, emotional and function, on top of or above technicality.
Yeah.
And because they're looking for something, they don't really have the technical ability to do it. They'll do it anyway, however they can, and it'll turn out however they can.
Hmm.
But it serves the purpose of what they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think more and more engineers are coming from a musical background as opposed to back in the day when they were literally electrical engineers servicing consoles and
Right.
stuff. And I think that probably, I hope that probably helps what you're talking about, which is being more connected to the root of the music and the root of the emotions behind the music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do say so because I do have a music degree. So I do come from a music background. I am a
Mhm.
musician before I am an audio engineer.
What's your
So,
instrument?
well, it was guitar.
Mhm.
However, the university where I went to in Colombia does offer the bachelor in music with emphasis in audio engineering.
Okay.
So it's more of an European approach, where you are an engineer who knows how to do music. So you're an audio music producer.
Okay.
So you basically have the same technical abilities as any other musician: sight reading, ear training,
Yeah.
literature, harmony, um, et cetera, et cetera. And you do know how to play an instrument really well. I learned how to play guitar, but I messed my wrist, so that
Oh.
career went down the drain. Well, you can't really play guitar and be a goalkeeper at the same time. So that's what I
Yeah.
did.
That
Um,
goalkeepers do, you know,
use the hands. Yeah.
yeah, a little. They're allowed, actually. I'm a
Yeah,
hockey
exactly.
guy myself, and I know
Oh, there you
I've
go.
broken this wrist 3 times, which has not
Yeah,
done me any favors for my already mediocre music skills. So,
correct. So
yeah,
then I started singing in choir, and then eventually I became like a choir singer, for chamber choir singer,
okay,
for far too long. And that's a lot of the vocal technique that I have now, which I use as vocal producer.
that's
Um,
right. Because you do a lot of
I
vocal production.
I do a lot of vocal production, hence the microphones, right? But
Yeah.
but yeah, so a lot of the technique I use it from my own training as a vocalist when I was performing in chamber choir for
Mm.
years.
And I assume when you're working with independent artists, a lot of these indie artists are completely untrained when it comes to the more technical aspects of voice control.
Some of them are, a lot of them are not. Because that the other thing that is happening is that, I mean, in the industry overall, a lot of independent artists are just basically artists that have quit their major label deals to become indies. And this is happening more and more often, to the point where like you have major digital distributors that are like part of the big majors, but they're just handling the distributing the music.
They're doing
and the
digital
artist,
deals. Got it. Okay.
yeah, and then the artist is taking care of everything else. So that is also indie as far as indie budget, indie everything else, but their preparation is bigger. But yeah, I mean, I've also found major label signed artists who have no idea how to use their voice correctly, especially in certain genres. Obviously, people can think that they can get away with not being trained as far as vocally trained, until one day it doesn't work and you've messed up your vocal cords, and that's when you start thinking about your career and your future. Yeah.
Going back, I want to go back to what you were talking about with recording with flavor, feeling the emotion of each instrument and understanding where it's going to go in the arrangement. So you also produce stuff that isn't Latin music, and you also engineer stuff that isn't Latin music. So how do you take that into more mainstream music that might be, especially in places where the music scene is a little more cookie cutter?
Right.
And so how do you take that into, because I feel like that's such a positive thing, and one of the things that when you're engineering somebody's record, quote, adds value in the business sense. I'm curious how you take that into approaching like a more traditional American indie record.
Well, in that case, thank God for references. So I mean, honest to God, it's like, I always tell my students, like, doing sound alikes is probably one of the things where like you find a lot of really cool skills. Because I mean, music is like there's every song is a sound alike of something else that's already happened.
Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of giants. To
the point of being extremely literal about it, not. But you're always referencing to something. You're always grabbing from something, borrowing, taking, whatever you want to call it. But it's always there. So I believe it's also part of like, I mean, there are the producers or the engineers, the Steve Albinis of the world, who will never do that. And they'll basically like put their fist down and be like, I'm never going to do it. And I take it as an exercise. When I've done those types of records, or even records like not only major cookie cutter stuff in terms of like the industry, but also, let's say, more culturally. For example, like there was one time that I got hired by this Mexican artist to mix. He had written a salsa music, which he recorded in Mexico. Mexico is not traditionally recognized by the salsa. Their salsa, but they've had a salsa industry since the 60s. And the way I mixed it like as Colombian. So we have a very specific way of mixing and blending salsa in Colombia, which is different from the Cuban, the Puerto Rican, and the Mexican. And they were like, no, it needs to sound Mexican. So I had to sit and listen to a bunch of references to get to the point where he actually enjoyed it. There's another example, which in that one, I was like, this is a great example. I was hired to mix an entire soundtrack for a television series in Mexico. And there was one song, when I heard it, it reminded me of the style of one specific artist. I mean, it's one artist from Mexico that has this super well-defined style in his production, in his songwriting, in his singing. It was clearly grabbing from this person. And when I heard it, I knew that I was working for Mexicans, and I knew this was a Mexican television series. So I'm like, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to mix it like that. So I went back to the references. I heard it multiple times, and I delivered it. And I checked, and I delivered it. Little that I know that the person who had produced the track is this artist producer. And he gets back to me, and he's like, I didn't know, because I was hired by the executive producer, and he was sort of like, executing the whole thing. So I didn't know that this track was actually musically produced by this guy. And when I send it, I get added into this WhatsApp group with this other guy, and I was like, oh God, I failed. And then the guy's like, thank you so much for making this mix. I was a little hesitant, but you did respect the cowbell. And this is a genre where you have a cowbell on every beat. And I'm not joking. It's like, it's there all the time. And that's the genre. That's the style for this dude. He's called Marco Antonio Solis, if anybody is watching, and they'll know it eventually when they hear about it. But it's like the fact that the Marco Antonio Solis's producer validated where I left the cowbell and the entire mix. It was like, honey, you did the homework. And that applies to everything. If I have to mix a punk song, it's gonna be the same. I just finished mixing up a metal album as well, and like they told me these are the references, and I went for the references and took it even further. So I think it's a responsibility. It's not my record. When I am producing the record, I set my own goals. I talk to the artist, and we figure it out. If I'm getting hired as a mixer and the reference is X, Y, and Z, doesn't matter where they're from. It is what it is.
That makes a lot of sense. It's I feel like there are engineers who we could name but shall remain nameless that definitely it's like, I'm going to put my thing on everything I do because I'm X, Y, and Z, and they hired me to do X, Y, and Z, which is not necessarily the case, which is how Michael Bublé ends up getting auto-tuned on one of his Christmas songs.
Yeah. I mean, and then if there is an A&R responsibility that I don't see getting well handled, and at that point I'm like, whatever. When I got clients that will look for me because they want my style of mixing, whatever that is, that's what I will provide. My style of vocal producing, that's what I will provide. But if I'm given a homework, I'll do the homework.
Yeah,
I don't care.
That's what you're getting paid for, you know?
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah. So moving to more of the interpersonal side of engineering, especially with current events going on. I don't know if anybody watching has noticed, but Maria Elisa is not a white dude. And shocking, I know.
Shock. I am very pale, I do have to say, but I am not a white dude.
Yeah. And you went into an industry that is, conservatively 98% white dudes. And I know you work with Women's Audio Mission, and a couple other organizations, but I think, me personally, I'm an empiricist, which means that it's always hard for me to empathize with people without understanding like a more, even just anecdotal stuff. And it's something that I've really worked hard on the last few years to get better at. But for people who are like me, I want you to, explain and tell people a little bit. Yeah, I have to be like twice as qualified to get the job.
And not even. It honestly, being qualified hasn't gotten me anywhere.
Really?
I mean, I am also not American, so I'm able to say this, but clearly people in this country, they don't really look for a good resume when they're trying to even elect a president. Just saying. I mean, qualification on paper in this day and age won't get you anything when people have a clear conception of who they think you are before they've even met you.
Yeah.
And that's the way of the world. So people, before even reading about me, or not even, like, once they read my name, they say Latina and they say woman. No, because there are no Latinos in the American industry and there are no women. Like, what is a woman? So I mean, sometimes I don't even get the chance. It's and it's not just me. I get the double tag, which is woman and Latino. Even for all my female born or female engineers who are American and very white, they won't even get the foot at the door sometimes just because they're women. So
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is. And I mean, we are trying to change by working with a lot of these organizations. We're trying to also teach younger girls, like for example, what we're doing, where we're moving the needle, where we are sponsoring girls from a younger age, high school age, or even early stage on their professionalized professional careers or even colleges, to just keep on track, learn, and find a good spot for them in the industry that is going to allow them to grow. And that's and when you create a community of
Mm-hmm.
people who are focused on the same goal, that's when you start making the difference.
Yeah. And are you
But it's
seeing change over the last, I don't know, how long have you been in the American music industry? I never even asked you that.
in the industry itself, it's going to be 10 years
Okay.
now.
Have you started
But
to see
in
any
the
shift?
American industry, no, I've been in the industry for like music industry 18 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's a matter of, I think I have seen the difference. I have seen, for example, the other day, it pleased me to see that a younger woman that I know was in the room with a bunch of artists, male artists, African American male artists, and she is a Latina
Mm-hmm.
and on her 20s, and I saw her in that room, and she was being nothing but flattered and congratulated by all of them for her work on those tracks that she'd done for this huge artist. And I was like, this didn't happen to me,
Mm-hmm.
period. I never
Yeah.
got the chance, and I know women my age didn't get that chance, Latinas or not.
But you are making room for people to get chances now with the work you're doing.
We all are,
Mm-hmm.
because we see that that is the way, even if
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't happen for us,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it will, that for somebody who's like, for example, like Leslie Ann Jones, now that has retired from Skywalker Sound, and she is a freelancer engineer, the fact that when she retired, the ones who were, including her, we were all paving the way. So when she retired from her full-time job, she got a chance that otherwise probably she wouldn't have had it
Mm-hmm.
before.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. You draw a wider circle, you get more talented people, you get more ideas in music, which by its very nature is this conglomeration of new ideas and this circulation of new ideas. And the more you add into that, the better it's going to get.
Yeah,
I
and
think, you know.
I have to agree with you. However, people don't not everybody rationalizes the
I
same way
get it.
we
It's
do.
easy to fall in love with the music that you listened to in high school that was formative for you and think that's the best music is ever going to be. That's really easy to do. I
Yeah,
do that sometimes, you know. I get nostalgic for stuff and then I listen back and go, "Oh, the
for real.
engineering's not very good on this."
Or not. Or you will realize that it's like, what was wrong with this people? How could I like this? But it's like, then that's when you realize that our work really doesn't matter. And when the song is really good, it doesn't matter who engineers it.
Yeah, the best advice I ever got from somebody when I was learning engineering was like, mediocre engineering can't ruin an amazing performance or song. But
True.
amazing engineering can't save a mediocre performance or song.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
ultimately you're in service to the artist and you're a pass-through entity. And you might be, you know, and especially more with the production side of it, there's a little more shaping it. But as an engineer, you're largely just like putting spit and polish on it, you know, as
yeah,
opposed to, you
yeah.
know, doing you're not doing God's work, you know.
Honestly,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of like a poor master can definitely, I mean, even ruin a great song, but in
Mhm.
the end, the song will remain great with whether the master is good or not. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I tend to agree in all of that. Um, but yeah, going back to our previous subject, which we diverted from it.
I'm good at that. I'll bounce around. Sorry.
Yeah, no, me too. But I did remember that we were talking about something else. So I do have to say that I am not expecting things to change like that, because
Mhm.
I understand that's not the way of the world.
Mhm.
And I think politically and socially, things have obstacles
Yeah.
have presented, and it's gonna get in the way.
Yes.
Orange obstacles have interfered,
Yes.
and it's presented in a way where like it's changed the political and social landscape, and it ends up affecting the music industry as it affects everything else in life. And it just means that our goal needs to be set further.
Yep. You
That's it.
control what you can control, and that's the
Yeah,
best you can do. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Which is a good
But
way to remind myself and or anybody else that's kind of dealing with any large obstacle outside of their control. Like, you can get as angry as you want about it and spend the energy on it, but that's not going to change it. It's like what's within my control that I can channel
yeah,
it to.
right. It's like, okay, we were thinking about women's inclusivity in the music industry by 10 years when the first Annenberg study came out. That may not happen.
Hmm.
It's okay. We will continue to find places and continue to find spots, and the ones who are more seasoned into the industry trying to make room and open space for other women who are coming into the industry, and
Hmm.
and try to support them and do everything in our power to figure it out, whether it happens in 2027 or it happens in 2037.
Hmm. Baby
That's
steps. Little strokes tell large oaks. So yeah. You talked about the music industry specifically and the shifts in the music industry, and I want to dive a little bit into that. You mentioned that indie artists are making less money than ever, which is a huge like it's a huge red flag because when the artists aren't making money, um,
we don't
everybody
make
that
money.
supports the artist, whether it be, PAs or stage techs or engineers or producers or the people that make gear also don't make money,
Of
right? Because
course.
there's this huge base behind every artist that's on Spotify, of other people that contributed in some small way to it. What do you think the number one culprit is? And I have asked a lot of people this, because I'm curious. What do you think the number one culprit is behind the music, like indie artists making so much less money?
I don't think there's
Okay.
one culprit. I don't think there, you can't really point it into this company or that company.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I do think that obviously digital distributors, I mean, did DSPs, I'm sorry, not digital distributors, DSPs like Spotify, YouTube,
Mhm.
Amazon Music and whatnot, they obviously, they could do better. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? They definitely could do better.
Mhm.
However, at the same time, it's like the Congress of the United States see this happening, and regulation hasn't really come yet.
No, not at all. It took them forever to
So
update, like, the mechanical royalties, you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
and it was already too late to
Mhm. Yeah,
my
they were
from my
about 20 years behind on that one.
yeah. So then it's like, and then let's add on top, because like it can always get worse,
Mhm.
AI.
Yes.
And the fact that it's, I mean, we heard the about the threats of AI about 2 years ago, and still we have no regulation whatsoever.
Mhm.
And now we know that actually some of these companies have been supporting the generation of AI within their own platforms, and like produced by these same platforms.
Yeah.
So the money is staying inside of these companies. So this means that there's less attention for real artists and more attention to artificially generated artists,
Mhm.
because the platform is self-feeding onto it. And again, there's no regulation. I mean, you've seen, I don't know if you've seen, and these may be dated by the time somebody hears it at one point, but like right now, the entire British musical scene is really aggressive, heading against their own government, saying like, we will not stand by you not doing anything about AI music.
Mhm.
And it's getting really like people are standing down and standing ground, and that is not happening. I mean, there has been attempts of doing it, but it hasn't really happened.
Yeah.
Uh, what Chappell Roan said, like the fact that because of the way it may be different in Europe. I mean, in Europe, by default, people do receive some sort of compensation monthly from the government, especially like I know in France, you can sign up as like you're an artist. You can receive some sort of like tax concessions. You also receive monthly stipends that allow you to support your art. In Latin America, obviously, we're not as rich, but there are lots of like government assistance and grants, and a lot of that, much more than you can find in the States. So this is a US problem where you get a chaperone saying like, congratulations to me, but like, listen, musicians are dying of hunger right now because they don't have they're like, there's nothing that they can do about it, and the system is not built to support upcoming musicians.
And it's there's so, I mean, I say this on the regular basis, and I don't know if it's comforting or horrifying, but like if the music, if nobody ever made a dime on their music again, like we would still be making it because I think it's such an innate part of human nature. But because of that, you know, because of the lack of value placed on it by sometimes even the artists themselves, these larger companies like Spotify and Amazon and stuff can take advantage of that.
And they're doing it, which is it's a fact. It's a fact. But the fact that also the government, which is supposed to protect the people, are not really protecting the creators themselves, leaves musician at a place where like, okay, then again, it's also like there could be a lot of things done by musicians as proposed by Chaperone, which are not really happening. I mean, she's doing something, and then Taylor Swift has done her part on other stuff, but like, I mean, it could be done in a much larger scale, and I don't think
artists are not terribly good at organizing.
Nah.
Once again, refer to my repair desk for an example.
Well, I'm not showing you the rest of my studio.
There's a reason why yours is blurred out.
For aesthetics, period.
Oh man.
I
remember my first introduction to like it wasn't even government assistance, but more of a government nudge. Was and my Canadian friends will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but Canada has like a certain, like if you're going to play Canadian art, like if you're a Canadian radio station, you have to play a certain percentage of Canadian music. And it's basically like we're just making room to give this a chance and give artists a place to at least present their ideas, right?
And the same thing happens in Europe, especially in countries like France or Italy or Sweden and many countries where like they are the sole country that basically speaks their own language and keeps their own tradition. So the radio quota for national products is really, really high. So it actually gets really hard for other industries or other mainstream American world market musicians to get into those radio stations.
That's interesting. So it can swing too far the other direction in some
cases. 100%. I believe, maybe I'm wrong, but it's something like between 10 or 20% for French radio.
Okay.
The international quota.
That's so the international quota. And the rest of it's French.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember what the quota is for Canada. I know it's like, it's not insignificant for like Canadian art to be.
And it applies the same to film. Like you have to contract this many Canadian workers as far as like on the behind the scenes, and then on the foreground you need to have so many types of extras. Like they are preserving their own ways and their own traditions and culture on behalf of artists
and nurturing their own art so that way and tradition can continue to like progress and thrive. It's not like, hey, we're being protectionist. It's, hey, we're giving this space to actually grow too, not just like be static.
But hey, here we are with our socialist way of thinking.
Well, and what's funny is I don't know if a quota would, I don't think that would necessarily work in America because like most of the stuff played on American radio is American, like if we were to estimate the percentage of what's being played in the top 40, that's American. What is it? 95%
ish. But then also at the same time, it's like only, I think it's the US, Iraq, and North Korea. Those are the only 3 countries that don't recognize radio as a royalty.
Yeah, and that's another super weird thing with like the way that ASCAP and CSAC and BMI calculate radio royalties by like a percentage of listening and stuff, or at least that's how it was. I don't know if it's updated since I was in
Yeah,
college.
but they do it only trying to find a way to actually get some money. But the
Mhm.
fact that in everywhere else in the world except for these three countries, again, North Korea, Iraq, and the US, everybody makes a royalty out of radio performance, public performance.
Which makes
X amount
sense
of
to
money.
me. Like it's, that I don't know. Yeah, we've got some stuff to fix in the music industry in America, certainly. It feels like it. When
And
you
it's
say
very
it's just three countries, it reminds me of the imperial measurement system versus the metric. It's like us, Liberia, and Burma
yeah,
that are
kind of.
using the imperial system. It's like, I mean,
Mm,
we did shoot a Mars probe directly into the face of Mars because of a metric imperial conversion error. So maybe we should like change this. You know, change.
I mean,
I get it. People are resistant to change. Change is scary, but it's also like, in the Buddhist tradition, change is inevitable. And when you
it's
embrace
like
it,
that skit from SNL. I bet you saw it, which is like, I believe it's George Washington talking to like his soldiers, and he's like, yeah, so it's like, so we're going to boil the water 100. No, 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 no. We're going to boil it at this other thing. And it's like, it
the
was talking about like
212. Yeah.
imperial versus metric system and how everything was so ridiculous. It's like, no, we do this by a foot. And it's like,
Yeah.
how large is the foot? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
ah.
Was it like, I'm sure there was plenty of culture shock coming from Colombia to America, but do you still find yourself like people say Fahrenheit and you're like, wait, what is that in Celsius?
Yes, I actually like my watch and my phone are in Celsius. Like
Okay.
I use Fahrenheit. I keep it at certain spots because I know that eventually, if I need to communicate with the outside world,
Yeah.
I kind of need to know. But I usually ballpark it. It's like, I know I'm going to start feeling cold below 67 or 65. That's
Mhm.
my own body temperature. But above that, it's like, and then it's like above 90 degrees. I'm like, crap, this is Miami. I hate it. I don't like this. Why do I live here? But aside from that, and then the teens, I love the concept of saying the teens. I remember
Oh,
the first,
like in Celsius?
yeah, no, in Fahrenheit, it's like when you're super freezing and it's like it's dropping down to the
The
teens. And I'm
teens,
like,
yeah.
whoa. The
Yeah.
fact that doesn't have anything to do with boiling water or
Yeah.
it's very ridiculous. But
I
I
mean,
keep it,
all systems of measurement are in some way ordinal and not cardinal. We just call them cardinal. That's me nerding out. Apologies.
of course.
Yeah. Before we're at like 52 minutes already. Shocking.
Woo.
We went over time just like I said we would because we're having fun. Um, when I got into school, I learned more about Latin rhythms and gained a much deeper appreciation for Latin rhythms. What's your favorite Latin rhythm if you had to pick one?
Oh, I'll stay with cumbia. This is
With
the one from my country. Cumbia.
okay, okay.
It's like a
I was going
no-brainer.
to say mine is Wapango. I got
Oh,
introduced to it on
Wapango is
accident.
beautiful.
It's
Beautiful.
so beautiful. It's
Yeah.
and I got introduced to it completely on accident. I think it was through Song Exploder actually.
Huh.
Um, and he had an artist on that was explaining Hupongo, and I went down this rabbit hole for like an hour and a
My
half on
dad.
YouTube, and I was like, "This is incredible!" With like the triple and duple meter
Well,
combinations, and
we do have that in Colombian music and other genres and overall everywhere in South America.
yeah,
It manifests differently, and then it's like you do have the three against two, but it's just like where you place the accent can make it either a huapango or a genre from Colombia called bambuco.
okay.
It's whether you put the
I'm
accent
gonna
like
have to
that.
write some of these down so I can go down more YouTube rabbit holes. Actually,
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, in Spanish we call it tres contra dos, like three against two.
Mhm,
And it's one of the things that as children we learn how to dance that
mhm,
since we're really young. And this is more like throughout South America and even Mexico, Central America, because there are so many rhythms and those are very traditional rhythms.
mhm.
So we already have those rhythms like pretty much internalized.
Which is
It
really
doesn't.
cool as somebody who has very little rhythm internalized. Because I grew up on very, like I basically grew up like in that town in Footloose where dancing was evil and you're not supposed to do it, Um,
Actually, on our side of the world is completely different. Like my mom was, I was going to dance rehearsals with my buddy friend
mhm.
boy when I was 5.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say it was the smart way to do it, the way that the way
Right,
that I grew up, certainly.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, if somebody wanted to work with a Latin Grammy winning and Grammy nominated and Latin Grammy nominated engineer like Maria Elisa, where would they go to find you and talk to you or listen to what you've done or just learn about your work with We Are Moving the Needle or Women's Audio Mission or listen to your
Uh-huh.
mixes?
Of course. So I think social media is a great spot. So you can
Okay.
find me as, my name is Maria Elisa, well, like Elisa,
Mhm.
but ever since the English way of saying my name, which would be Eliza, I actually, a lot of people call me like that. So I just turned my handle into Maria Elisa, which is just Elaisa.
Okay.
So Maria Elisa is the place where like you'll find me everywhere. And also on my website, which is mariaelisaayerbe.com, which if when people read my name, they can just add the .com.
I will make sure I add it in letters across. And
Perfect.
yeah, exactly. It'll
Double
just
check.
zoom up right here. There we go. Okay, beautiful.
Right, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Slower than that, obviously, but thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate one, listening to your mixes, two, that you use our mics, which we didn't even get into, but I don't really care because it's more about the conversation. Um, and
But the
and
mics have gotten, this is important to say, that mic has gotten me 2 vocal pop nominations in the Latin Grammys. So there you
Oh,
go.
well,
Thank you.
okay. There you go. All right. I'm glad we squeezed that in at the very end there.
Yes,
I didn't even think about
buy
it.
these microphones. Buy these microphones.
Okay. Perfect. Good
Perfect.
ad at the end of it. But yeah, I really appreciate just also that you are attempting to change things in an industry that is historically kind of resistant to change, because I think that change is important. It's how you grow. You don't grow by standing still, So I will have Maria's info at the end here, and thanks, and we'll see you next time for whoever the guest is, because I don't actually know yet.